afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Teresa Ladrick and Welpley, and I serve as the director of the Bannon Institutes and the Ignatian Center for Jesuit Education, and it's my privilege to welcome you all here today. We have a little bit of change of plans with our food, so this will be kind of a progressive dialogue and dining event. So we'll be having our initial dialogue with our contributors, and then when we move to our conversations at table, that's when we'll be able to partake of food and conversation with one another. So thank you for your patience with that. The work of the Ignatian Center that many of you know is to further Santa Clara's distinctively Jesuit Catholic tradition of education by promoting the integration of faith, justice, and the intellectual life for our community and the broader community. And one of the ways we do that is through the work of these Bannon Institutes, which host interdisciplinary faculty collaboratives, a podcast series, public lectures, and roundtable dialogues like our event today. Our 2016-2018 Bannon Institute takes up the question and call, is there a common good in our common home? A summons to solidarity. This past Saturday in Modesto, at the World Meeting of Popular Movements, Bishop Bob McElroy offered an address urging us all to become disruptors and rebuilders of solidarity. Quote, "We have a candidate of disruption. Now we must all become disruptors. We must disrupt those who would seek to send troops into our streets to deport the undocumented, to rip mothers and fathers from their families. We must disrupt those who portray refugees as enemies, rather than our brothers and sisters in terrible need. We must disrupt those who train us to see Muslim men and women and children as sources of fear rather than as children of God." End quote. Bishop McElroy went on to offer that the powerful pathway of Catholic social teaching, see, judge, act, must prompt us to safeguard the dignity of the human person and the common good of our nation. Quote, "We must see the situation clearly, judge with principles that foster the integral development of people, and act in a way which implements these principles in the light of everyone's unique situation. That is, to become rebuilders of solidarity." End quote. Today's roundtable dialogue is convened to further this effort. First, to look and see what these times ask of us in terms of racial and ethnic justice. Second, to consider how our work here at SCU, our research, teaching, studies, and commitments might constitute a critical response. And third, to promote action that advances the common good in these uncommon times. Our dialogue partners today are comprised of ourselves as well as our 6 panelists who make up the Bannon Institute Faculty Collaborative on Racial and Ethnic Justice and the Common Good. These faculty are convening over a 2-year period to collaborate on research, teaching, university initiatives that advance racial and ethnic justice and the common good. The collaborative is chaired by our Bannon Faculty Fellow, Brett Solomon, Associate Professor in the Child Studies Program and Interim Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. Our Bannon Institute scholars in the collaborative are Cruz Medina from the Department of English, Margaret Russell from the School of Law, Bill O'Neill of the Society of Jesus, member of the faculty at the Jesuit School of Theology, Shanique Chang in the Department of Communication, and Tony Hazard in the Department of Ethnic Studies. To set the stage for today's dialogue, we'll open with a brief compilation from the inaugural season of Integral, the new Bannon Institute podcast on the common good that features the contributions of each member of today's panel. Then collaborative members will be invited to share out their own reflections on the ways in which pressing moral issues of racism, xenophobia, mass criminalization, and segregation urge us, require us, to see, judge, act, to disrupt and rebuild, and to advance racial and ethnic justice and the common good today. We'll also have the opportunity to dialogue as a community. For following their opening remarks, each member of the collaborative will join a table to host a conversation together, and that's when we'll eat as well. So let's get started. In the first season of Integral, we're exploring how issues of racial and ethnic justice intersect with the common good.
Catholic social teaching on the common good.
Common good is more than a philosophical, hypothetical question.
Advancing the common good together.
Truth is a common good.
There is a common good in our common home.
Black men are 6 times as likely to be incarcerated as white men, and Hispanic men are more than twice as likely to be incarcerated as non-Hispanic white men. At play here, I believe, is a perverse dialectic, where our punitive regime constructs its own object. The alien becomes illegal, the young black man, the criminal black man, one word. So bodies become illegal, criminal. The central concern is not retribution or punishment, but as in Catholic social teaching on the common good, the healing of breaches, the redressing of imbalances, the restoration of broken relationships.
Contemplating common good is more than a philosophical, hypothetical question, but rather a question we should be considering when we act and share our experiences with others. Are we contributing to the many communities we are a part of, or are we simply contributing to discourse of discrimination and oppression of individuals who similarly want the right to pursue their American dream?
Refusing to see that people of color live in a different reality in the U.S. society is no longer an option. How might our society achieve a cultural solidarity without demanding differences to be erased? What does it mean when people are to assimilate to American life? And to which American life exactly should they emulate anyway?
What has white allyship been over time? What did it look like during slavery? What did it look like during the modern civil rights movement? And what does white allyship look like today? I ask, who among potential white allies is willing to challenge the authority of that badge, to deconstruct the meaning of that badge, or to remove that badge altogether?
Cultural competence is the ability to successfully teach students who come from cultures other than your own. How can cultural competence develop common communities, beloved communities, that are capable of seeking, celebrating, and advancing the common good together?
We need truth commissions. We are a nation that in the area of racial and ethnic justice has papered over the truth, has actually actively fostered untruths, something there will never and can never be reconciliation in this country. I disagree. I would like to light a candle for truth in the hope that it leads to justice.
So please join me in welcoming our Bannon Institute Faculty Collaborative on Racial and Ethnic Justice and the Common Good.
So we're each going to spend a little snippet of time discussing our work, our research, what's brought us together. There's 3 questions that we will be answering for you in our work dialogue. Those questions are, what do these times ask of us in terms of racial and ethnic justice? The second is, how does our work, so you said not having my, hello? How does our work or research contribute to our understanding and response? And last, how can we advance the common good in these uncommon times? What is our call to action? And just before we get started, we want to dedicate this dialogue to the memory of Dr. Ramon Chacon, who we will be celebrating and honoring his life later today at 2 o'clock in the Mission Church. So I'll pass the attention over to Tony.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's great for you to be here. I'll give the mic. Thanks, Brett. So to go ahead and jump in, this particular moment, I would say that this political moment requires us to resist racism wherever we find it, to interrogate the concept of race, along with constructions of whiteness and including white allies, right? We need to educate ourselves about the very history of whiteness and challenge its circulations today, particularly, I think, in the face of denial of the existence of white supremacy. And I would argue that these are absolutely necessary approaches, or maybe techniques, to employ today with the goal of building not a post-racial society, but a post-racist society. In terms of my own work and what I think it contributes to these larger questions about racial justice, my current project explores the work of a group of anthropologists in the 1930s and 40s, all 5 of whom were white or Jewish. And I think looking at their scholarship is instructive because it highlights how the importance of the concept of race was then in the 1930s and 40s, and how the concept of race remains very important today. In addition to the production of knowledge, how we understand what human difference is through the social sciences. So my research also demonstrates, again, considering that this group of anthropologists were all white and Jewish, that there are multiple ways to be a white ally, right? So this particular group of anthropologists, they sought to challenge Jim Crow segregation, not simply by protesting or marching, but by producing scholarship that interrogated the very logic of racism and whiteness. Right? They attempted to deconstruct those very ideas so that they could be laid bare. Right? The very logic of racism could be laid bare. In terms of advancing the common good, I think that all of us, including white allies, can help advance the common good by re-engaging directly with whiteness, with the concept of whiteness, with the ways in which whiteness is being deployed today, from the top of our political system, from the White House, from the Department of Justice, down to us in our everyday lives, within our families, right, in our classrooms, in our workplaces. I think that interrogating the very concept of race, along with whiteness, and attempting to break down, right, and address stereotypes that are circulating, again, not just in a rhetorical fashion, because what we have is policy being made on the basis of these very ideas of race that are at least 300 years old. So to address that in our everyday lives, I think, can allow us to enact everyday acts of resistance in the 21st century.
Speaking of being an ally, in 2013, a sociologist named Jeffrey Wang analyzed data on racial attitudes of more than 20,000 white respondents from a general social survey. He wanted to see the link between people's intelligence and their attitude about African Americans. He wanted to see the link between people's intelligence and their attitudes about African Americans and different policies designed to redress racial segregation and discrimination. He found out that high ability whites were more likely than low ability whites to reject racial segregation and to support social integration in principle. But when it comes to providing actual support on remedial policies for racial inequality, such as school busing programs, affirmative action, and fair housing laws, high ability whites were actually less likely to support them. He concluded that racial and ethnic injustice is not simply a result of low cognitive capacities or deficiencies in socialization. Rather, it comes from the need of dominant groups to legitimize and protect their privileged social position within an intergroup conflict over resources. Coming from a cultural and communication study perspective, I believe the need to address how issues of power and history are realized in our everyday interactions guide how and what we share and talk with people around us. Through making these connections between the historical events and current life, the power relations we exist within can then be revealed. It was just several days ago we marked the 75 years of the signing of the Executive Order 1966 that sent 120,000 Japanese Americans involuntarily to 10 internments in the United States. During the struggle against the Muslim ban signed last month, Japanese Americans are one of the adamant allies with Muslim Americans against this ban. These times ask us not only to unpack the structural issues affected by historical legacy, but more importantly, our positionalities in relation to these structures, because this is where differences lie, and how able and willing we are to engage in these differences. My current research intends to understand how immigrants in Taiwan are framed in public discourses, and how, as a consequence, citizens are simultaneously articulated. With the colonial history and global movement in mind, I developed a concept called relational citizenship as an attempt to tease out strategies used to incorporate these newcomers into Taiwanese society. So in the sense that many of these immigrants, mostly are women, they often are framed as daughter-in-law of Taiwan or mothers of the Taiwanese. So essentially, I'm trying to understand how their differences are treated. Some are highlighted, some are hidden. Some are made to connect to the Taiwanese society for various reasons because of different relational goals in mind. So in terms of how we can try to advance the common good, I really see imagination holds great power in how we understand ourselves and relate to one another. On February 15th, the New York Times published an article with the title, "Immigrant Mother in Denver Takes Refuge at Risk of Deportation Wounds." I was drawn to the article because instead of wording undocumented immigrant, the phrase immigrant mother depict a different relationship between her to the U.S. society. In Doing Race, a collection of 21 essays for the 21st century, entitled by Paula Moya and Hazel Marcus, one a psychologist and the other a literary professor, we're encouraged to reconceptualize race as something that we do instead of something that we have. So institutions such as schools, laws, and the media, they do shape how people are perceived and treated in society. At the same time, individuals like us engage in choices such as accepting certain group perceptions, choosing certain residential areas, or shopping at particular communities. So in light of Gregory Wang's research, I'd like to encourage us to keep a Doing Race diary just for a week to see how we engage in racial differences as a way to gauge our standing and doing racial relations here in the United States. And I think it's in these acts of examining and imagining our relationship with fellow members might we be able to start to advance the common good.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here. Competence, conscience, compassion, these are the values animating our school and its mission to promote the common good in our common home. They are values at the heart of the ideal, at its best, of Jesuit higher education, a nation, intellectual tradition. Yet, I think today, perhaps more than ever before, realizing these values is a hard race. The ideal of Martin Luther King's beloved community seems so remote, slipping through our fingers. Our common good is a house divided against itself. Indeed, I think we differ not only about what we ought to do, but the very meaning of our differences. As my colleagues have mentioned, we seem to lack a common moral vocabulary to decide our differences, how we imagine the other. Michael Sandel, a Harvard theorist, said today we have to choose between the politics of rights and the politics of the common good, the currency so quickly debased in our public square. For partisans of rights, so often rights empowers a sovereign self who is emancipated, freed, abstracted from tradition and history. I look into my heart. A white liberal man, I see no racism, no misogyny, no homophobia. I am absolved of history and responsibility. Conversely, the politics of the common good can often look to the thick social bonds that confer identity. We're knit together by a common history and sentiment. We share a story of a common political community. We're endowed by birthright with a distinctive racial, cultural, ethnic heritage. And here, whiteness matters, but it's no longer a descriptive racial category. Rather, whiteness enshrines privilege and a politics of resentment, ressentiment, where it's denied or contested. In my own work seeking to reimagine human rights in the context of anti-Black racism, I look to our heritage, really at the heart of this school's mission of Catholic social teaching, reconstructing that so we think of how Catholic teaching doesn't compel us to choose between the politics of rights and the politics of the common good, but seeks creatively to integrate them. John the 23rd defines the common good, in fact, as the set of social conditions that must be presupposed if the dignity and basic rights of every person is to be realized. Rather than looking, as in the past, to a single notion of human perfection or fulfillment, the morality of the heights, we look to the morality of the depths, to the reality of unjust suffering, systemic deprivation. The common good looks to the basic conditions that every person is owed simply by virtue of her common humanity. And so you see, following from the very notion of this expansive common good grounded in the rhetoric of rights, we can speak of an option necessary for each of us personally, but also collectively. And as a school or an institution, liberation theologians speak of an option for the poor, but I think it's better said, an option for anyone suffering systemic deprivation. The critical question for public policy, one to which each of us in our own way, I think, must respond, is this: whose equal dignity is unequally threatened? Whose equal basic rights have been historically threatened or denied? We do not then have two separate histories. Ralph Ellison, the great writer, once said that whatever else American history is, it is also Black. We are embedded in history. In fact, the common good is enfleshed in our common story, and so much depends upon how we come to tell it. There are not two separate histories, one Black, one white. There is a single history. It is our common home, our story. The language of rights, it seems to me, functions critically or deconstructively when it lets us see the distortions of that history, the original sin of slavery. But it functions constructively as a clearing for new stories to be told. How do we, in our school, in our classes, in our neighborhoods, tell the story of a beloved community? Rights function constructively as well. If the original sin is slavery, the original blessing is a story of resistance beginning in the Black communities, but a history of resistance which I think each of us can deeply learn from if we have ears to hear. One of the African theologians says, today we need a church with big ears, large ears, a church that can listen. And I think if there's a lesson any of us take, we need big ears, large ears to listen to one another so that we can come to tell a common story in common.
Hello, everyone. When I was a schoolgirl, I remember hearing a story very often, perhaps apocryphal, about our first president, George Washington, and it went something like this. When George Washington was a kid, he chopped down a cherry tree, and instead of weaseling his way out of it, he was asked by a parent, who did this? And he said, I cannot tell a lie. I did it. So it's interesting to think about the journey from the first president, whose dishonesty, frankly, might be unpacked if we had more time, to the current president, when often I think I cannot tell the truth. And the sad thing, and even galling thing, about our current situation and our current predicament is that we spend so much time wrestling with determining how many lies we've been told, not just by one person, but by many people, that we can't even do our work, meaning the work of social justice. So The subject of my project is actually truth as a common good. And by focusing on truth and truth-telling mechanisms, I draw upon research in the law that is done about truth commissions and other truth-telling mechanisms in international law. Truth is considered to be a right, that there is a right to truth under international law. However, as compared with our legal systems in the United States, our focus, and it is what it is, right? Our focus is really more facts and proof, right, and evidence. And the truth often elides our grasp. So I wanted to focus on truth-telling mechanisms in U.S. history, and there are many, many more than we're aware of. Among those that I have talked about in my work and written about in the United States, first of all, have we just recognized the 75th anniversary of the executive order. And of course, there was a Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, the Japanese-American internment, which issued its final report in the 1980s. So one lesson that we learn is that if we don't pay attention to truth-telling contemporaneously, it may be lost to us, and it may await a future generation to uncover it. Other examples of this are 1920s Rosewood, Florida race riot that actually eliminated an entire thriving African-American community. There was not a commission to uncover the truth and actually propose reparations, which were authorized by the state legislature and the governor until 1993. Another example is the 1921 Tulsa race riot. There was a commission about, again, a set of violent incidents that wrecked and eliminated a thriving African-American community, but that commission didn't happen until the late 1990s with the final report in 2001. And there are others. So it's not just the South African Truth and Reconciliation model that I think we're drawing upon. I think there is sort of a homegrown United States effort to uncover the truth. On the university campuses, many of you may have learned about Brown University's concerted effort, kind of leading the way for universities to look into their own histories and legacies of injustice. In the case of Brown and Yale and Princeton, having to do with slave owners as part of the origins of the university. Regarding Native Americans, for example, the state of Maine, actually with the current governor, who is quite a conservative governor, instituted a Truth and Reconciliation Commission about the decades-long mistreatment of Native American children put into mandatory foster care from the Wabanaki tribe. And their Truth and Reconciliation report issued in 2015 actually used the phrase cultural genocide under international law to describe what the state of Maine had engaged in over many decades. So, truth-telling and truth mechanisms, I think, are something that I really would urge in this day and age. And again, I find it galling that we even have to light a candle for the truth, but we do. And in the area of racial justice, it is especially imperative because, as I said in the podcast, there are concerted efforts of disinformation or guilt that is inflicted upon people who try to refer to historical memory by saying, can't you just stop looking behind us, we need to look forward. So I guess my contribution to today and the tables that discuss these after we get our lunch really focuses on what we can do to promote and uncover truth in the current day. There is, of course, a famous saying, if you want peace, work for justice, and there's the bumper sticker version that says no justice, no peace. But I would add to that, no justice, no peace, no truth, no justice. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. I'm really grateful for you all to be here and also be on this panel with such a great group. It's really hard to follow, I have to say. So the first question they asked was, what do these times ask for us of ethnic justice? And I think it's really important for us to be reaffirming what we think of in terms of being inclusive, because it's really important with this recent travel ban to be thinking about how civil rights are in fact human rights, and specifically how these kinds of travel bans are really allowing for greater instances of racial profiling. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, especially because with the recent travel ban, we've seen how certain populations are already assumed to be criminal, and by placing these travel bans on certain countries, the president has been able to sign these orders, this executive order in his office, but then he goes on Twitter, which comes to my own research, he goes onto his Twitter account and tries to make these assumptions about terrorism, unsecure borders, and immigrants into facts, right? Which kind of goes with what Mark was saying about what is the truth. If you tweet it, does that make it a truth, right? I guess that's an important question. So my own research looking at Twitter, part of the reason we're interested in it is because it is this medium for communicating this experience. So when the president tweets about this fear of the border, it does seem to connect with this audience who has these thoughts, and that's something to keep in mind too. These times ask us to be critical and advocates of de facto accusations of presumed guilt that these bans represent. And this is important because my past research, I was in Arizona during the passage of SB 1070, which was the racial profiling against anyone who could potentially be illegal Latinos, and at the same time the HB 2281 bill, which was anti-ethnic studies. So we kind of saw, living in Arizona, how both the minds and bodies were attempting to be controlled through this legislation. And at the same time, by declaring anyone in a group potentially illegal, the law sort of puts the burden of guilt on this person who's the subject of the law. So when someone is questioned about their legal status, the validity of their existence and rights as a citizen are called into question. When I was in Arizona, I was still trying to be positive, though, too. So I actually became interested in how Latino students were using Twitter in writing classes, which sounds really crazy, except for I teach writing, so this is something that connects with me. I found they were doing things like creating community and knowledge. They're using this linguistic variation of Spanish and English to communicate more inclusively. And this is something that really speaks to me, being a rhetorician, that a lot of the writing, I have a lot of great writing faculty here. They argue, we always want to keep in mind our audience when you're writing anything. And this was something I think my students were doing as they were tweeting all the time. They're like, that's only Professor Medina. I can tweet in Spanish and English. She's cool with that. And it created this greater way of being inclusive and be more effective with the messages we're creating. And so my other work that I've been doing recently has been looking at how these different communities of color continue to use social media and other media, considering a lot of them are tend to thought of having lack of access or technology literacies. So I'm kind of interested in the ways that these communities of color have often relied on traditions that are already existing. So one person who's contributing to this book collection I'm working on, she looks at how the hashtag for the Black Lives Matter created this platform for people to interact and also to create moments for activism in real life. And of course, we can't divorce that from the civil rights movement, where we're able to see how a lot of what happens in social media has traditions that have been carried out already in real life. So thinking about this, plans for activism, going through my notes, sorry. Students on it, reminding me about the audience. I already jumped to that. I'm so excited to be here that I'm just skipping ahead on what my excitement is. But like I said, they're really, my students are the ones I think that have taught me and remind me about these things to consider right now at this moment when we're thinking about our intended audience. It's this idea that when we're communicating, there's this ideological connection, right? So when the president uses things like sad to punctuate tweets, it doesn't have that same intended effect on maybe a lot of us here. However, when we go on Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Yik Yak, I know from my own experience how easy it is to share these news stories with kind of like these sarcastic comments that tend to come with it. And I've used cynicism despite knowing the negative effects of these vitriolic messages to call, others to action, or sad, as the president would say. So the question then, thinking how we can think about this moving forward in these uncommon times, I think, there are a lot of these common good questions to consider in terms of racial justice, civil rights, environmental justice, and education policy. They're all coming under attack right now. And I actually come back to something that Father Bill said a couple nights ago when he was talking about a friend who said, you know, we don't have the luxury of despair at this moment. And I think when we're trying to advance the common good, I would twist a little bit what Father O'Neill quoted, and to say that, you know, everyone who's sort of working to raise the consciousness and awareness of these issues, you know, we can't afford the luxury of cynicism when it comes to engaging with others on these issues with whom we don't agree. You know, if we don't present our position in this place that sounds concerned with the common good, then our audiences who are either apathetic or unaware of these issues will tend to reflect and match our cynical arguments with the same kind of tone that we come in. So, you know, we don't have the luxury to be cynical, so how can we engage with those who ideologically disagree with us for the purpose of raising the common good? So, that's all.
Thank you. So, in response, to what do these times ask in terms of racial and ethnic justice, for me and my work, it really all boils down to cultural competence. For a teacher, I'm in a program that teaches teachers. So for a teacher, cultural competence is the ability to successfully teach students who come from cultures that are different than your own. So this means developing personal and interpersonal awareness and sensitivities. It means developing certain bodies of knowledge. It means mastering a set of skills that, taken together, underlie effective cross-cultural teaching. And I also add to that it really, what am I trying to say? A main component of cultural competence is understanding the interplay between power and justice, and how that interplay specifically impacts children, who are certainly impacted by all of what's happening now in our country and in our political climate. So how does this relate to my work and research? My research focuses on the preschool to prison pipeline, which is the systematic way in which children, particularly African American and Hispanic children, are being pushed out of classrooms, suspended, expelled, and ultimately ending up in the juvenile justice system and ultimately the criminal justice system. And so my work focuses on what is happening in classrooms, where the pipeline begins with teachers. And if you listen to my podcast, the blame is not on teachers, but teachers certainly do have an overwhelming responsibility for the advocacy and care and nurturing of the children that come into their classrooms. Because it starts in the classroom, we also need to recognize that the children that we are teaching in schools today are more diverse than ever. And as teachers, we need to understand that culture plays a critical role in learning. And so cultural competence not only leads to effective teaching, but it also serves as a really effective avenue to bridge relationships with families. We're not just educating children, we're engaging with their families as well. They're a valuable part, an integral part of the equation. So my work relates to teachers and their understanding of students that they're teaching in their classrooms in an effort to circumvent the pipeline. We should not even have the term preschool to prison pipeline. Preschool, not school, preschool, because preschoolers are also being suspended. And we know that it's the kids of color, and particularly the males, that are disproportionately being suspended and expelled. And it gets into other interplay between my topic of research and bills with mass incarceration. I mean, that's another roundtable for another day. But how can we advance the common good in these uncommon times? I think providing opportunities to teach and experience empathy is so incredibly important. And that's not just for individuals, teachers who are in schools, that's for all of us. That's for our humanity. Valuing and honoring students, valuing and honoring individuals such as ourselves for the unique spirits that they are. Everybody's unique, we need to honor and value that. And in an educational context, for me, again, it gets back to cultural competence. And not just in schools, because that's my focus, but we can use it in our government, we can use it in our prison system, we can use it in police forces, we can use it at Santa Clara University. I think cultural competence is really valuable and a key factor in our success towards the common good.
Thank you all for sharing out of your own work to help us to engage what are the most pressing issues of racial and ethnic justice today, how some examples of the ways in which our work, all of our work, may advance racial and ethnic justice, and how our own university's commitments as a Jesuit Catholic university really call us forward in this regard. So we'd like to have a conversation together. This kind of sets the stage for some of the kind of entry points in, both in terms of issues and action as faculty, staff, and students here at Santa Clara. And so we'd like to engage that question with one another of how we can advance the common good in these uncommon times. We'd also like to do that over food. So I invite you to partake of the food that is here, and then each member of this collaborative will be joining one of the roundtables here, and we'll conclude with a call to action that's coming from each of our conversations. So please join me in a brief thank you for our panelists.